Welcome. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the podcast, The Ex-Monk's Drive. I'm your host, Gaurav Arora, and our today's guest is Jason Fladlein. Jason is an entrepreneur, has started several organizations, built products, sold millions of dollars of products, and author of a book called One Too Many, and is popularly known as the Webinar Man. In our today's conversation, we are not only going to talk about webinar. In fact, in all my conversations with Jason, he has left me spellbound with the wisdom and the insight that he brings in from his experience of selling webinars, building businesses, and selling products worth millions. So in today's conversation, we are not only going to talk about how to sell webinars or how to build products. Instead, we are going to talk about how the principles that he has learned from all his experience that can be used in becoming a leader that you want to become. How can you bring in curiosity in your life? How can you let go of the identity which is not serving you? And how can you step into being the person that you want to become? Let's take a dive and hear from Jason. Jason, thank you so much. Such a pleasure having you here. I didn't expect that one day I would get lucky and I would get an opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Well, you're most welcome. It's a pleasure.
I've been reading this book for quite some time, Jason. It says One Too Many, The Secrets to Webinar Success. I'll definitely come to this. But very curious, you have kept something on your table on the left-hand side. What is that?
Yeah, Balaramji, right? So in the childhood pastimes with him and Krishna, when they decide to appear 5,000 years ago, and they're the butter thieves. So the mischievousness of them in their childhood pastimes of stealing the butter, as we were talking before the podcast here, is I have a Vaishnava is what I would be considered from a spiritual perspective, and that's just a worshiper of Krishna. And so this is a very appropriate title for a podcast with the word monk in it, because it really what changed my life, and it's actually, we can break it down because it led me into doing what I do in business, is when I was about 20 years old, I was just in the worst place, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and had a lot of childhood trauma. I had these panic attacks. So I was afraid to leave the house. And then I got my hands on the Bhagavad Gita by Srila Prabhupada, and it's the way that it was introduced to me. It said something along the lines of, a sane individual, if he sees something and tries it and gets a benefit, he'll continue with it. And I said, okay, that makes sense to me. So I started chanting, and I started following some of the Vedic principles, and I started to see some relief. And so it was really nice for me. And then I had a really strong practice, and then I kind of got pulled back into this material world, if you will. I don't know if it's my dharma or what have you, that I had to okay, I want to build this business or whatever. So I kind of lost the practice, getting it back again, which is really nice. But this is a statue to remind me of that. And there used to be a boy, Krishna here. He left, and so it's symbolic to me. So I'm trying to get him back. And so this is a reminder. So, it helps me to stay grounded in what's important. I want to have an impact. I want to help people and want to connect with them. And I feel like that's kind of the purpose of what I'm supposed to do here. But it's not just to a necessarily only material end. But yeah, it saved my life. And so I try to have that spirit around me. So, you're the first person since I put this on the table here that's actually asked me about it.
Thank you. Now, I was really intrigued and curious, and that's the reason I asked you. I thought it's Krishna or it's Balaram, and I didn't expect that. In fact, This is such a serendipity, Jason, that in the year 2012, I got an opportunity to interview Radhanath Swamiji when he wrote this book called The Journey Home. And in that interaction, I asked Radhanath Swamiji that in your book, the journey home. You have mentioned about calling, you have mentioned about purpose. How can one find his or her calling? And I asked Radhanath Swamiji that, Radhanath Swamiji, I'm like a small child still in my nappies. I don't know how to find the water bottle for myself. I don't know how to find the milk bottle for myself. And you are talking about finding your calling? Then Radhanath Swamiji, who he is, that epitome of love and kindness and peace, in his childlike voice, he looked at me and he said, you know what, Gaurav, you have already initiated your journey. I said, what does that mean? He said, you know what? You said, how can I find my calling? By asking the right question, you have already initiated yourself in that journey. Today, if I look back, I think the journey began with that question. Who am I? What's my calling? What's the nature of reality? How can I actually experience peace and happiness every moment? Why am I here? Those questions started then, and today also I continue to be with these questions. Jason, thank you so much for sharing this part of your life. I was not expecting this, trust me. Jason, every time when I've spoken to you, I find you speaking like a monk. I find you speaking like a child with so much of curiosity. I find you speaking like a coach. And yet, you call yourself a webinar expert. In fact, you have written this book, international best-selling author, One to Many, The Secrets to Webinar Success. Just curious, how did you identify your gifts and your superpowers? And why did you choose to go ahead with this identity, if I may, of a webinar expert?
It kind of was forced upon me. It's a great question. I started doing webinars, and to be specific, the webinars that we're talking about here are sales webinars, where from an advertising perspective, I always enjoyed the concept of them before I even did them. Because most advertising is annoying, it's disruptive. You hope that you make up for the annoyance with the product if they buy it. And I like the webinar model because it allowed you to lead with value first. So the advertising was valuable in and of itself. And so that was always interesting to me. I said, there's something here that connects with me, that makes me feel good about marketing. And in 2008, nobody really did webinars. Nobody knew how to do them. There wasn't a book like the book that I wrote. There wasn't a guide. The people that were doing them were either platforms sellers, so they would speak in front of live audiences and sell that way, and then they would try to like force that into the webinar, or they were these teleseminar guys, because a lot of people were selling via a phone, believe it or not, back then, in conference calls. It's so funny how the world's changed. And so they would take that same technique and try to like pigeonhole, cram it into a webinar. Nobody was making it holistically from the ground up. And I had the benefit of being brand new. I didn't have any experience. I never had spoken on a stage. I had never done a teleseminar before. I'd barely had any success. I had a small amount of success with a little bit of knowledge, selling really cheap products on very specific topics. But I saw something there. So I started doing webinars fanatically, constantly, in all sorts of permutations. Like the first webinar that I ever did was a 4.5-hour training where I just taught. I had a small customer base back then, maybe 2,000-3,000 customers at most. And I said, I want to try this out. I'm going to do a new product live on this webinar. If you show up, I'll give it to you for free. If not, you can buy it from me later. And I think I had 12 people show up to that webinar. It was a small amount of people, but I said, I got an audience. Let me see what I can do with it. And I trained for 4.5 hours, and it was a smash hit. So that was the first time I used the webinar. The second time was, I said, hey, it worked out really well the first time I did a webinar training. So I'm going to do a series of them now. So this product I have over here, which teaches like an 8-step process, I'm just going to turn each step into a week, and I'm going to do a 2-hour webinar on it. Do you want to join? And I think I sold that product for like $200, which was the highest price product I'd ever sold at the time. Before that was like a $37 product was, I think, the highest. And that was a hit. So I had 8 more webinars that I could do after that I practiced on. And then the third time, finally, it was like, I was saying, hey, if this works good to deliver the webinars, what better way to sell a series of webinars than with a free webinar? So then I did a webinar where I was like, I trained on a topic and I said, if you enjoyed this, I got 8 more just like this. You can pay $200 for them. Are you in? And people were in. And so over time, I was using it from a variety of different angles. And then I started developing the methodology, the framework, the systems. And nobody wanted to learn this stuff, Gaurav. I just did it. So I used the webinar to market other things. Like we had a SaaS company when we started Rapid Crush in 2011. So in 2008 to 2010, I essentially rolled solo, sold information products and coaching programs. Then I wanted to sell software. So I started a business with my business partner, Wilson Matos. And here we are, nearly 13 years later, working together, still just as close as we've ever been, still working on things amazing. And so I started selling that. Then we started learning how to sell other things on webinars. And over time, occasionally somebody would pull me in and say, hey, listen, you want to do this webinar or you want to teach people how to do webinars? I'd be like, nah, nobody wants to learn that stuff. They go, come on, try it. So I'd try it. Nobody did want to learn this stuff in 2011, 12 or 13. And then slowly but surely over time, the webinars that I was doing became very legendary. Like we were setting records in different industries and spaces with the webinars, and we were proving it in the marketplace, the superiority of a webinar over other types of marketing vehicles, which were more popular and that people like to use more, and that there was more around training on those things. And then over time, people started to wake up and realize the power of webinars. And by then I had solidified myself, not from a marketing perspective, not from a hype perspective, but from actual results. All roads pointed to me. And that none of this was deliberate. And I didn't want to be branded as the webinar guy. But the marketplace kind of forced it on me. And then I fought it for years. And then I just finally embraced it because I just realized if this is the door that opens me up to the world, I'll take it, and then I can go from there. And so this is how I've been okay with being labeled and branded as the webinar guy. And so now I just accept it and I say, cool, this is what we're going to do. I'll get you in the door. You read my book, and then you'll say, hold on a second here. The webinar is just the outcome of a lot of strategic thought and a lot of positioning expertise and a lot of creative problem solving, right? And then I'm like, okay, now I got you.
Just curious, coming back to the book that you're speaking about, Jason, One Too Many. If I go to this book, I personally feel this book is on persuasion. This book is on changing beliefs. The book is on Ericksonian principles. This book is on how to make and set goals for yourself and go for them and look at the challenges that might come in your way. This book is beyond webinars, at least the way I have perceived webinars. Just curious, where do you draw your inspiration from? Because in this book, you have used different modalities, be it the modality of neuroscience, be it the modality of hypnosis conversations, be it the modality of persuasion. Where do you draw your inspiration from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll tell you how I figured out these different modalities was the first year I started doing webinars, by a stroke of luck, I stumbled upon this concept where I was on a webinar one day and there was like 50 people on and I'd ran out of slides. But these people seemed engaged. Some of them did. They were in the chat. They were going back and forth. And I say, these people seem qualified. They seem like good people to buy this product. When I created this product, I kind of had these types of people in mind. And they're not buying it, but they keep asking questions. What's going on here? Because I know that these people should own this product, that it's going to help them more than not owning it. The money that they keep in their pocket ain't going to serve them as well as exchanging it for this product. I just knew it, right? So I said, what do I need to say to help this person understand if they should make a decision on this or not? And then I also thought economically. If I was selling a $300 product back then, and it took me an hour to pick up another sell, that's $300 an hour. Back then, that was a lot of money for me. So I went for a full hour with a room of like 50 people, a virtual room, we're on a webinar, right? And I sold 2 of them. And I said, I wonder if I could go another hour and maybe pick up another one. And this isn't just to make money, right? To me, this is an act of service, is to help somebody make a decision, a yes or a no decision. Either one I'm fine with. But a lot of people get stuck in indecision, and that's not okay with me. So I went another hour, and I picked up another cell. And I thought, you know what? This is awesome. I'm making extra money I wouldn't otherwise make. It's manual labor, certainly, and it's hard work, but it feels good, and I feel like I'm of service. And so I did that for like a year straight. Every webinar would be like a 4-hour webinar. It'd be an hour and a half of formal structural presentation, and then like 2.5 hours of, can I help this person make a decision that would be in their best interest, whether it's a no decision or a yes decision? And I made a lot of money doing that. What I didn't realize is I started developing techniques that I would later codify and solidify that became the standard techniques that when people discovered me, they're like, oh, this is top shelf persuasion. Now, what would happen was in between these webinars, Gaurav, I would run into an encounter where I'm like, I can't get through to this person. What's going on here? Like there's some sort of facade that I can't get past. And so I'd reach into my toolkit of persuasion tools, and maybe I had 2 or 3 or 4 at the time, and they weren't sufficient. So I'd say, okay, I got to figure out a new tool. So I would go research it. I'd say, where's a tool at that I can find and study and then assimilate? The beautiful thing was I would take the tool used over here and figure out a way to adjust it to use it on a webinar. So like we talk conversational hypnosis, aka Ericksonian hypnosis, that was done in a therapeutic setting. So I had to say, okay, this is what's working in a therapeutic setting. How do we adjust this and morph it into something that could be used in a sales setting or in a coaching setting? And I had the knack to do that. I had the ingenuity of doing it, and then I could test it immediately on a live audience within a day or two, and then go back and adjust it and say, okay, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. And over the next year or two, I developed this very big toolkit where I'm like a mental locksmith now. If this first way doesn't work, I'll try the second way. If the second way doesn't work, I'll try the third way. I'll try the fourth way. I'll try the fifth way. And that's where I really developed a lot of these models, which ultimately comes down to changing a limiting belief. If somebody believes they're going to fail, no instruction or no system or no product, even if it's the very best product, is going to convince them otherwise. It's less about what they know. It's more about how they feel about themselves. And so you can give a person the best solution in the world, but if they have an impoverished identity of their own capabilities to use that system, you will lose them. They won't buy. Or if they do buy, they won't win, because they will find ways to act that are consistent with the identity. And if the identity is, I'm not sufficient, then they're going to find ways to make that true. So in a sales situation and in a coaching situation, I started to work on ways in which I could either improve that identity or I could make the identity irrelevant, and in a variety of other ways too. So I started working on this. I'm like, oh, there's belief patterns that are happening here. Why does a belief pattern form? What can I do about it? And then I started learning all sorts of stuff from a variety of different sources, and then assimilating them into the specific use case of webinars. And Beautiful. Man, I mean, I've gotten so much inspiration for so many places.
Yeah. So let's double click on that. You mentioned about that, the money that you're keeping in your pocket can serve you only as much. That's one point. You also spoke about that when you are selling something on webinar, I personally believe that people buy your time and they don't value that unless they buy something that they can touch, anything tangible. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in service business. However, what I'm more interested in is the persuasion skills that you have accumulated in all these years. So you mentioned that I had 1, 2, 3, and 4 in my kitty. And I'd realized that what's stopping me to get through this person? And then I would go back home, do my study, come back and try and experiment and make an attempt. Tell me if you can just help us understand what are the different ways with which you can actually persuade others. That is the first question. Let's look at that. Let that be the second question. The first question is, what do you think? What are the possible challenges that a person might have with his or her belief system or identity? And unless we address that, we'll not be able to persuade the person. So these 2 questions, over to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. what I've discovered is agreement frames are better than disagreement frames. And let me elaborate on this. So this will be an aha for a lot of people in and of itself. And so if somebody comes to you and say, I can't do it, as a coach, let's just use it from that perspective. They say, I can't do it. The natural reaction is to do what? What does a normal person say to somebody? Say, I can't do this. You would say to them,
you can do it.
You can do it, right?
Motivational speakers.
Yeah. So you're in a disagreement frame there. You have mismatched them. You are literally out of rapport from the get-go. And that's what everybody does. Somebody says, I can't afford it. Yes, you can afford it. Somebody says it costs too much. It doesn't cost that much. Somebody says I don't have enough time. Yes, you do have enough time, right? All kinds of communication I see on a daily basis, almost all of them come from this disagreement frame, especially when we're doing persuasion. And the parent persuading the child, or the child persuading the parent, more often is the case these days. These are disagreement frames. Now, there's usefulness in a disagreement frame, and there's times I'm using it, but the default go-to is an agreement frame. Somebody says, I can't do it. You say, yeah, you're right, you can't do it with the tools you currently have. Well, what if you had new tools? So this is technically called a partial agreement frame. I'm agreeing with their statement, but then I'm changing the context and perimeters in which that can be applied, right? They'll say, I can't afford it. I'm like, you're right, you can't afford it, but the alternative is even more costly. So you can't afford either choice, not buying it or buying it. Since you can't afford either one, which one would you want to do anyway, regardless of whether you could afford it or not? Well, I'd want to do this. Okay, can we figure out a way where affording it is no longer a big deal? Like, they're putting the emphasis on cost, not the emphasis on value. So I agree with them, they can't afford it. But then I say, well, we got to figure out a way to get it anyway, because the alternative is even worse. If you can't afford this, you certainly can't afford the cost of not doing this. And they say, okay, I'll take a look at that, right? And so this is a powerful communication model. If somebody disagrees with me, I don't want them to. I want to agree with them, actually. So I'll say to people on webinars, I will say to them literally, I'll say, you probably don't believe me. You probably think I made these testimonials up. You probably think that I have misrepresented the opportunity as something other than it is. And you think that I'm here deliberately lying to you just to get money out of your pocket. Is it that you don't believe me, or is it something else? Maybe it's that you don't believe yourself. And then I'll go down that route if I have to, right? But I will acknowledge all of the skepticism, all of the problems up front. And now I'm in an agreement frame by literally agreeing with them. If they think that I'm lying to them, or agreeing with them, yeah, I want your money. They say, oh, you just want my money. You're right, I do want your money. Because if you give me your money, I have more responsibility over your outcome. If you give your money to somebody else, I don't know how they're going to treat you. And if you don't give your money to anybody, you're left to your own devices. And you've been down that road.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the money that you have in your pocket is only going to serve you as much. And as I'm just listening to you, Jason, it reminds me of a question, a conversation. The question is, who is holding the frame? Whosoever is holding the frame is going to drive the conversation. And as you're mentioning, if you are already in the disagreement mode, the rapport is out of the box anyways. Now you'll have to put a lot of effort to bring back the rapport and then drive the conversation.
That's right. And there's times and places for disagreement frames. The way I always looked at it is, here's where I got some big insight into persuasion. Is we were running a campaign in 2015, and this was the biggest product on the market at the time. And there was thousands of affiliates promoting the exact same product. So the way that this business works is a vendor creates a product. This is a $5,000 product. And they say, listen, if you refer a sale to me, so I'll give you an affiliate link. It'll be tracked to you. If anybody clicks on it and buys it, I'll give you 50% of the sale. So every affiliate's making $2,500 if they can refer somebody and that person becomes a customer. There's 1,000+ affiliates competing over these sales in this marketplace in this time, because there was a lot of money to be made, because a lot of people were buying this product. It's a really good product. And I would sit there and I would say, if they're on 50 other affiliates' email lists, and all these other affiliates have been attempting to persuade them and haven't sold them yet, what are the prospects not hearing that they need to hear in order to make a decision? What are they missing out on? And what you discover when you do these analysis is all the other affiliates are basically saying the same thing. They're using different synonyms, but they're saying the same stuff. So I'm like, that ain't going to cut it. What is not being said that should be said? I'd obsess over that. And I'd think over that. And in that launch, we sold, and it's still the record to this day, $9.8 million in 8 days of this product. And every other affiliate combined sold like 15 million. So we were 40% of the sales. We had beat second place in that contest by $7 million. That's how far ahead we were from the rest of the pack. And it came down to that fundamental question is what's not being said that needs to be said that could change everything. And so if you look at the disagreement frame, everybody uses that. So even if it was useful as a technique, which sometimes it is, if it's already been heard and that person hasn't changed their behavior, saying it again is unlikely to make a difference. Repeating something over and over again is a poor strategy for conversion. And so I got to say, what needs to be said that isn't being said? And that's when the frame. Now let's talk about the frame, right? So let's first define what a frame is. Like in a literal sense, a frame would be around a picture. My friend Joe Weldon, who's like a National Speaker Association Hall of Fame. He's in the Hall of Fame over there. He's been speaking for 40 or 50 years.
But I would like to read what he has written about you. He says, Jason isn't good or even great at webinars. He is world-class, extraordinary and truly amazing. For my very first webinar, Jason generated more sales and more money than I have for all the webinars I have done. So that's Joel Weldon, NSA Hall of Fame speaker.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? And Joel's he's 80 plus years old. He's still out there. He's one of the most beautiful human beings I've met in this business. But yeah, to your point is and Joel says that about the frame, and I love that as an example because the context in which the information or the communication is centered around, it's in a box, and that box is your frame. So if you come from the position of, like when you said frame control, and we're getting a little bit esoteric here, so hopefully everybody's not like, what kind of space language are they speaking, right? But with frame control is essentially in any conversation, somebody controls the frame, where they are the one that dictates where the conversation goes. And persuasive individuals are great at controlling frames, whether they're individual or in groups. And that's what I like about a webinar is it's on my agenda. It's my slides. I'm kind of determining where it goes. Now, in interactions, though, it's easy to lose a frame if you're not careful. So if somebody says to you, it costs too much, and you get defensive, you've lost the frame essentially because they're like, that person doesn't feel very confident in what they're doing. Maybe either I can get a deal from them or, I don't want to do business with them because they don't seem to be in control of things. They don't seem to be the one that I want to look to. Like when a surgeon comes into the room to do brain surgery, they have the ultimate frame because not only are they dressed apart, they're in an environment that they control, not you, and they have all the knowledge and you have none of the knowledge, right? That's a very powerful frame. And so when I'm working with customers, I have to fight their frame, and their frame is this. This is the default frame of the human condition. Safety first. Survive at all cost. Survive at the cost of happiness. That is how we're programmed evolutionarily. We will sacrifice our own happiness just to draw another breath. And we have to fight and overcome that programming if we're going to have progress. And so this is why the people that are most qualified for your products don't buy them. Because they're like, damn, I could change, and I don't know what change is like. Even positive change is an unknown, and an unknown is scary. I got to spend money, and I got to spend time to make this change. You know what the safest thing to do? Nothing. Not a single thing. In the short term, that's preservation, that's safety. It costs nothing, no energy. But if you run that program out for several weeks, months, and years, doing nothing is the most disastrous thing that a person can do. So their framework coming in most, and especially in mass, is I am cautious, I am conservative to a fault where it will eventually harm me. And if I buy into that frame and I allow them to operate that at that lower frequency below a capacity of potential that they have within them, I am not serving them. And so how do I get them to operate at a higher frequency? And so I have to help them, but I also have to attain that authority. So they say, listen, even if I don't trust myself to make this decision, I trust him, and that's good enough. And if they know you care and they know where you're coming from, that goes a long way. But you have to show them that in this particular situation, in this particular context, I know what I'm doing. And I am confident that if we can decide if this makes sense for you or not, then if it does make sense for you, I'm confident that this will be a better deal for you than doing nothing or buying something from somebody else. And if I conclude at the end that you're not a good fit for this, I don't want you to buy from me, because that doesn't help me and it doesn't help you. And so we're always on this quest to determine who is the best person for my product. And then once I discover them, it's not enough just to put the product in front of them. The best customers you'll ever have are the ones that are going to take the hardest amount of time to unlock. That's the 80% of the market everybody else misses. If we operated under the same premise of every other affiliate during that promotion, we might have got $1 million. We might have been pretty good. We would have been at the top, no doubt about it, because we're good at what we do, right? But we wouldn't have got the other 7 million that everybody else missed, because we went past the easy ones. We went past the low-hanging fruit, right? And we went and we were able to break through to the customers that were initially hyper resistant, because they were resistant not because they didn't want it. They were resistant because they knew that they needed it, but they were afraid of the change. They were afraid of a commitment in a program than the program they were currently running. And we got to work with them on that. And that's why when you and I talk, you're like, yeah, you do a lot of coaching. Even though I'm selling, it's primarily coaching. I'm helping somebody get out of their own way so they can make that positive change that they seek.
You know what? Last 7 minutes was a masterclass for me on persuasion. We started from agreement and the disagreement, and then we spoke about frames. Whosoever is holding the frame is driving the conversation. And when you spoke about when you are interacting with people, just look at where they're coming from. And based on that, we need to look at what is not being said that needs to be said in this conversation. Just curious, Jason, how can we apply the same principles when you are leading a team in an organization? We do a lot of work with leaders. In fact, this webinar is heard by a few of the best leaders in the country, in the world. On this platform, we have got vice presidents, we have got the CEOs of the organization, we have got the entrepreneurs and the founders who have shared their wisdom and their insights. Just curious, the principles of persuasion that you're sharing, how can I apply them in my own life as a leader when I'm leading a team in the world of disruption?
That's a great question. So my expertise is mostly in leading markets, leading small individual teams. I recognize the concept of it. I don't do it. I have a business partner, Will, and he leads the team. So sometimes the best part about leadership is recognizing a weakness and finding somebody else who has the strength to take care of it for you. So that's one of the ways to do it. But it's the same principles applied. First of all, you got to have a knack for it. Since I'm a highly creative type, I do my best work in solitary, alone, in my own head, working these models out. And so the disadvantage of that, because everything has an advantage and everything has a disadvantage. Every strength has a weakness. Every strength, there's a weakness in it, and every weakness, there's a strength in that. And we might be able to talk about that here in a little bit. And so I realized that I lose the edge that I have, which is the best contribution that I can give to myself, my team, and to humanity by being very hands-on with the team. But I realized the importance of it. So I find a creative way in which to make sure that happens. And then I have my business partner, Will, who takes care of all that. So Will and I will work together heavily. And then he will go and he will bring it to the team when him and I are aligned, because he sees my back. He has my back. I have his back. He sees my blind spots. I see his blind spots. And we can make a more holistic determination. But ultimately, whether you're leading a market or leading a team, what you got to have is disruption. You got to have something that will fundamentally shift an industry. Something that when people encounter it, they can never go back to the old way of doing things. You want to break something in a way that it can't be put back together again. You want to break it in a positive way. So whatever the thing is that you're selling, whatever the thing is that you're trying to put out there to change the world, it better be so compelling that people will drop everything else that they have in order to be engaged in it. And I think that takes care of a lot of the tactical stuff otherwise you'd have to do. If people just wake up in the morning, here's a good way of thinking about it. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, Gaurav, which is the curse of information. Now people have learned all this neuroscience of like If you want to get up early in the morning, here's the things you need to do. And then they have all these scientific studies to back it. And they're all legitimate and they're all valid. And they're like, okay, you know, you don't want to drink coffee until after 90 minutes of waking. You want to get sunlight in your eyes first thing in the morning. And you start to run down this list of rituals that looks like somebody with OCD, that they would run a list of rituals in order to take care of their obsession. This is their compulsion, if you will. And I'm like, you know what? That's all valuable. But if you have this burning desire within you to do something that's in your purpose, you get out of bed automatically. You don't need to worry about filtering blue lights, and you don't need to necessarily do saunas and cold plunges and all these other things, right? Yeah. You don't wake up. It wakes you up, right? You don't get out of bed. It pulls you out of bed. And then all of those other things there are just inconsequential. You should consider using them if they help get you a little bit more out of it. But there's fundamentally the bigger picture is missing. So if you want to lead, have something so compelling that to people, they can't stop using it. They are compelled to be involved in it, because that becomes their life purpose. So make your life purpose somebody else's life purpose. Play big.
I just love it. One of the past presidents of the country, late Honorable Mr. Abdul Kalamji, said, "You don't dream while you're sleeping. Your dreams don't let you sleep." And as I often share with people are never lazy. It's the intensity in their dreams which is very dim. Regulate the energy up, regulate the intensity of their dreams up, and you'll find them very active in the game. Just curious, Jason, you use this sentence about strengths and weaknesses. When you said that every strength is a weakness and every weakness is a strength, tell me more about that.
Yeah, there's so many layers to that. So on like a superficial tactical level, like on a sales level or on a coaching level, if somebody says, you know, Jason, I'm a procrastinator, I said, fantastic. So first of all, it's an agreement frame, right? Fantastic. Let's procrastinate on your excuses. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, if you're good at procrastination, let's put it to work. There's utility there. So if somebody says I'm an imposter, I would, awesome. Just let's be an imposter to lesser thinking, right? Let's be an imposter to your limitations. How do you know for certain? How are you so confident in your limitations? If you're willing to doubt your capabilities, aren't you willing to doubt even your beliefs of your own insignificance? And they're like, okay, I get it. So on a communication level, I always see anything as being useful. And so within weakness, there is massive strength. I was terrible at communication. I was the kind of kid, Gaurav, where if I was walking down the street and you were walking on the other side, I would cross the street so we didn't have to make eye contact with each other and maybe have to say hi to each other. I was that timid. I was that shy. I was that afraid. And so I had to study basic communication just to appear to be a normal human being. So that was initially a huge weakness for me. But because I had to go deeper than everybody else had to go, it became a massive strength for me. I had to work hard to get what other people got naturally. So if they got it naturally, they weren't really motivated to do much with it, because I had to earn it and squeeze every ounce out of it I could. Not only could I appreciate it, but those became very valuable building blocks that could compound and add up over time. On the other side of things, though, too, we see this in organizations, is they get really good at one thing and then they get stuck on that one thing. And then when the world changes, as it will, they become obsolete. And so we have to continually realize that our strengths, if we let them, will eventually imprison us. And that's why we always have to be working on new skills. We always have to be like a child learning something new for the first time. We can't lose that curiosity, and we can't lose that edge that got us there in the first place, because you had to work really hard to get there. But then once you get there, this weird phenomenon occurs. You barely work, and then all this money comes to you because you have momentum in the marketplace. You have reputation. You have assets that can be leveraged. And then you start to coast. And so now you're doing the opposite of what got you there. And it will get you back to where you were if you're not careful. And so the ability here to recognize that nothing is in and itself valuable. It's valuable in how it's used. And so your greatest strength will become your biggest weakness if you let it. However, at the same time, your biggest weakness can become your greatest strength. And that's really exciting. Let's just not judge things. And I think we'll do better, both in ourselves and in other people as well. So I love the customer. I never judge them. I never look at a customer as lazy. I'm glad you brought that up earlier. And I try to coach and train people to reconsider that viewpoint of their marketplace. Because how can you be empathetic and how can you really love your customers and want to serve them if you look down on them with disdain? To me, that's incongruent. And so I say, this person isn't lazy. This person is overwhelmed because there's too many things coming at them simultaneously. My job isn't to make their life more complex then. My job is to simplify. Okay, now I can better serve them, because if I take the attitude that they're not lazy, they're just over leveraged. How do I remove things from their life before I give them my thing? Now I'm going to be more impactful to them. Yeah. And so everything has a usefulness. And that's why it's good to recognize that it's the utility of the thing. In this case, it's useful. In this case, it's a hindrance. Over here, it's powerful. Over here, it isn't. And so we always try to seek to find empowering states. And we always seek to avoid or minimize limiting states. We're talking emotional states here. Yeah. And I think that helps people. Yeah.
And once you recognize that, the question to ask from self is, how can I be an ease to work with? How can I be an epitome of hope for someone when the person is already overwhelmed? And what you said about every weakness could be a strength for you, it was bang on. It took me several years back in my life. There was a time I used to stutter. And I used to cry because people would make fun of me. It took me several years to work on myself with the belief that a day would come when you would appreciate every single word that's going to come out of my mouth. It took me days. No. It took me weeks. No. It took me years, decades to work on that. And today, if you ask me, Gaurav, what's the gift that you feel you're blessed with? Is I would say is the way I communicate and the way I connect with others. Jason, I have come across situations where people tend to get stuck with their own identities and they don't have high estimation of themselves. They tend to estimate themselves lower than where they are. What do you think? Why is it so? And what can I do as a co-traveler, as a colleague, as a friend, as a leader that might assist the other person?
It's a great question. I've suffered from this. Sometimes I still suffer from this. I don't think it's something that goes away. It's kind of like you got to shave and you got to take a bath every so often, no matter how good you are mentally. You got to do some cleanup on this. This idea of the identity it's filtered through a perspective. And this is what I really helped me when I was going through that toolkit I told you earlier. I discovered it was all about perspective. If I looked at it from this way, I gained this insight. If I looked at it from that way, I gained a different insight. And so I wanted to be able to maximize all the perspectives that I could utilize that would help me and empower me, and not just be left to the perspectives of limitation. So most entrepreneurs and most people in general, they measure their progress based on how much more they need to do. So this is looking forward to the future. And then that puts them in a state of deficit. Here's what I still need to do that I haven't done yet. They don't measure it from the past. Look at everything I've done to get to this point. It almost never happens that way. It's where you got to put in some work in order to do that, which puts you in an abundance state of being. And so one of the closes I use with clients is I used to say to them, this will empower a lot of people when they hear it, is there used to come a time when you couldn't walk, you couldn't talk, you went to the bathroom in your own pants and somebody else had to feed you. Look how far you've come. Yeah. And they're like, oh, wow. You're telling me this task that you're doing right now is harder than that, right? You didn't even know how to speak a language and nobody even taught you. You learned it yourself just through observation. You tell me that is easier or harder than what this is over there. And they start to say, okay, yeah, I get that, right? Now, out of all these perspectives that I've discovered, the most powerful perspective is the identity. I think the identity is more influential on who a person is than anything. And so when I'm listening to somebody and watching them and working with them, I look for clues on what's the identity of this person, or what do they identify with? How do they label themselves? Because then they're only able to work within the confines of that label. This is, again, I don't care how strong that label is, it has limitations. And so I want to see and hear what that label is. And I want to then be able to figure out ways of, can we shift some part of that label, or can we completely change that label?
Precisely.
Altogether. And what can we do about that label? And so somebody said to me one day, this is really interesting. So I was on a call helping a client hired me to help him sell $100,000 thing. So this is a business group that it costs $100,000 to be in, and you have to be qualified and all this stuff. So I said, I'll take some calls for you and help you build a model so you can sell this thing and train your team on it and so on and so forth. And so I got on one of these calls, and this guy says to me, he says, I understand I need to climb ladders in order to, come up in this business, and I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to climb the ladders. And so in my mind, the label was ladder climber. Well, what's the presupposition of that? That's a lot of work. That's a lot of effort. It involves, going one rung up, and there's a lot of other implications of that. It focuses on the self and the individual, that I have to climb. I have to do this, and it's all on me. And I started working with him right on the sales call on considering a different identity other than ladder climber. Is ladder climber the only way that you have to look at this? If you identify with a ladder climber, then everything you're going to do is going to require a lot of effort. It's going to require a lot of focus. What ladders should you climb? How do you know the ladder is the right ladder to climb? What building is it leaning on? It could be leaning on the wrong building. Instead, we started to build an identity of somebody who is able to be in a network, because we were selling a networking thing, and be able to contribute in a way that whatever was put out was gotten back multiple times. So how can I be the value adder, not the ladder climber? How can I be the value adder? And we started to shift that identity here, because then I said, now you don't have to climb ladders anymore.
I just love the metaphor.
Yeah, and he recognized that, and he resonated with that. And it was extremely valuable to him. And so, I don't like to be the webinar guy, because to me, the identity and the label on that, you have to kind of concede it to the market from a marketing standpoint. But I've never labeled myself as that. I've always thought of myself as a strategic problem solver, a strategic thinker. I want to utilize the way this is the way I always talk with clients with webinars, is I said, essentially, if you want to make a nice meal, you need the best ingredients, but you also need the best cook. So exactly. the best ingredients without a good cook is going to give you a terrible meal. Simultaneously, or I should say conversely, the best chef with terrible ingredients isn't going to cook a world-class meal either. So you need both. And people think, though, if I had to pick between the two of those, I would rather be a world-class chef with average ingredients than to be an average chef with world-class ingredients. I think I'm going to get a better outcome. So I look at myself kind of as the chef. I look at myself as the person who creates and cooks up these things and puts them out there. I don't look at it as work. If I have to go to work, I don't feel too good. But if I can express and I can create, and my keynote is my canvas, it's like me being Picasso, and my art is the presentations that I develop. And those presentations, they come from this higher level identity of strategic problem solving. This market has this problem, and everybody else is trying to help them solve it this way, and it's inefficient. I have to sell them on a new paradigm. What is that paradigm? Let me figure that out creatively, and then let me strategically position it. The webinar is just a byproduct of that. The webinar is just the outcome. You want to sharpen your axe before you chop the tree down. So the swinging of the axe is the webinar, but the sharpening of it is the thinking and the strategic problem solving that goes into it. So I'm careful not to identify myself too much as the webinar guy. Externally, we got to take it, right? So question to everybody in the audience to reflect on and think about is, what current identities do you take on? Because you take on different identities in different situations. Which ones serve you really well? Which ones should you consider updating? And could you try on different identities and see what happens? Because if you can, that can be a game changer instantly for you.
Yeah. I'm just loving this conversation. One, when you use this metaphor of a ladder climber, and in my mind, I was still stuck with the metaphor until you decoded that metaphor. I could connect with that. And also, I loved it when you said that internally, I'm not the webinar guy. I'm not the webinar man. I am the strategic problem solver. So what I'm also picking up is you may have different identities in the different context. For the world, you could be the webinar guy, but internally, I'm being somebody else who is more empowered. I'm just loving this conversation, Jason, because in the last conversation where we had Dave Orich, and he spoke about the way you show up in the world comes from the identity that you hold. Before that, Jason Pfeiffer, right? I was having this conversation. I asked Jason, who are you without your titles, without your books that you have written? And then the way he started, he actually took us to the mission statement that he has created for himself. I asked this question from my audience, who are you without your titles? Who are you without your identity? And the way you said it, I think that has decoded it really well, that we can have different identities in different contexts and different situations. Take a pause, ask this question from yourself, which identity is serving you? Which identity is not serving you? Jason, I understand you create your identity based on the experiences you have gone through in your life. I personally believe it's not that easy to break one identity and step into another identity. Would it be possible for you to share a couple of ways that could help an individual to step into and show up in a different identity? Because one, people don't understand when you ask this person, hey, what's your identity? Who are you being in this moment? People might not understand that. It's too esoteric. How do you deal with that situation?
So the number one way I deal with it is I collapse their model of reality. So everybody has this model of reality of how they see themselves. And you can either try to change that model of reality, which is extremely hard to do and doesn't usually work that well, or you can have it fall upon itself. You could just have it, you could lean into it and it will break apart just in and of itself. I'll give you an example of this. So I learned most of this from Milton Erickson, who was a father of modern conversational hypnosis. And a client comes to him and she wants to lose weight. And she's had this problem where she's lost weight, and every time she's gained weight. And so she's identified that losing weight is extremely painful and gaining weight is really easy. And she's just been in this pattern. She'll lose weight and then she'll gain it. She'll lose it and then she'll gain it. And so Erickson forces her to commit to this plan without any deviation. And he makes her agree that no matter what, she'll listen to exactly what he says. And he makes her gain weight first. He makes her gain more weight than she's ever gained in her life. And now she's begging him to lose weight. And he's like, you're not ready. You're not going to lose weight. I'm not going to let you lose weight yet. And so the pain of gaining weight now is greater than losing it. So losing it becomes easier than gaining it. So this time when she gets up to the weight, she then loses all of her weight. She gets to her ideal body weight and she keeps it off because the pain of gaining it is greater now than the pain of losing it. That's an example of collapsing a reality. You lean into it instead of fighting it. You blow it up to the point where it's inconsistent for them to continue to hold that belief, that identity. Another way that I've done it with a different client is a compulsive nail biter. So somebody that bites their nails. And I asked them a question, how do you know which nail to bite first? So this is eliciting a model of reality. How do you know which nail to bite first? And nobody's ever asked them this question before. So this goes back to, if you say the same thing everybody else says, good luck, right? And now I've gained instant rapport. Now I've taken the position of interest. I want to know more about the process. But here's what happens when you do this. You bring consciousness into an unconscious situation. Now all of a sudden you elicit some control for the client over the problem. Now the presupposition is you have a process, you are choosing it. not that you are a victim of it, right? So in and of itself, that's powerful. Then he starts to say, okay, well, I know how to choose this nail first. And I say, well, why this nail instead of that nail? And then he comes up with an elaborate thing. And the longer he starts to explain the elaborateness of what's going on here, the sillier he begins to feel.
Precisely.
Because he's like, this is ridiculous. Now that I finally said it out loud, now that I put a voice to it, it collapses on itself. You don't even have to tell them. He just immediately concludes there's probably better ways to get relief than this way. There's probably healthier ways, more holistic ways to get relief than this way. So that's on a micro level. So on the macro level, we try to take the identity and we try to magnify it to the point where it blows up. So if you continue to behave in this way for the next 25 years, where would it lead you? So this is a shift of time. And that's really powerful at changing somebody's identity almost instantaneously. If you continue this behavior and you continue to do this, where would it lead you? And they're like, okay, I've not run that pattern yet. And now you can help them understand that this identity probably isn't going to get them where they want to go. Now, what's really important in a situation like this, you got to be very delicate about this stuff, because this is surgery for the soul, right? We're going into some very sensitive parts. You have to honor whatever it was that got them to this point, because it served them. If for no other reasons, it served them to get to the point where they can change. So you can't look at whatever their identity is with disdain, with judgment. You have to acknowledge the value of it. The beautiful thing about that identity is it's led them to the point where they're now capable of change. And there's value in that. We should absolutely be appreciative of that. And so I always help clients with that as much as possible, to not look negatively on the identity they currently have, not be judgmental towards it, because then it still won't feel good if they change the identity and it could creep back in. So instead, we want to honor that identity. Here's another good way, is have a funeral for it, a metaphorical funeral, if you will, where we can grieve it properly. So we can bury it and we can go through the grieving process of it, and then we can put it behind us. And so we look at, well, if we were to have a funeral for this and honor it for what it was and how it has served you and how it's protected you and how it's brought you to this point, what kind of funeral would we have for it? And now, because there's a void there, they have to fill that void with something. And generally, human beings, when you remove a block, they find something that is healthier, something that is more valuable. They're naturally going to then operate in a better way. It's kind of like a computer bug. That computer bug will continue to run in a pattern and you won't be able to fix it, but you go and you change a little bit of code and then it runs just smoothly. Most human beings, they're pretty good overall. They just got a couple bugs in the code. And if we fix a couple bugs in the code, then they'll naturally run pretty well as a result of that. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so these are some of the ways in which we can shift identity. I'll give you one more, because a lot of people, they identify, they have this limitation of fear. We all do. Fear is the greatest limiter of all. So what we do is we personify it. And I say to a client, we're not going to get rid of fear. But we don't have to allow fear to drive the car anymore. We can put it in the passenger seat. Now, whether or not you want to put a seatbelt on it is up to you. So fear is going to be along for the ride. It's just not going to be driving anymore. And so we shift the identity there of a victim. I'm victimized by my fears and I have no power over them. To, there's fear in my life because it's unrealistic. It's what's the word I'm looking for here? It's delusional in a normal, healthy human being to believe that somehow you can get rid of the fear. You can't. If you try to and you somehow do, I'm worried about you, because that's like, now you're sounding very psychopathic.
Precisely.
The goal isn't to get rid of the fear. The goal is to allow the fear to help you in certain situations, but not at the expense of living your life. And so if we can shift the identity to fear is somebody who accompanies me when I go and do the things that I do, then that's going to be very effective from either trying to be absolutely delusional and pretend it's not there when it is there, or to be victimized by it and not be able to do anything other than what your fear allows you to do. So shifting that identity ever so subtly, it's amazing. You put a crack in a foundation in the right spot, it will crumple the whole foundation. So when I'm looking at identity shifting, I'm trying to think, what's the weakest point of this identity? And with one small tap, how can I shatter that identity? So that way it no longer continues to constrain this person in the way that it always has. And we do it. What we do is kind of easy, honestly. Like, I'm not doing therapy. I'm not taking somebody through a childhood trauma experience that has post-traumatic stress disorder, right? We are applying this in a business setting. So it's a lot easier. And it doesn't solve everybody's problems either, because there's certain things they have to go through in order to do these things. But in a business capacity, in a business relationship, vis-a-vis the product or service that you offer or what you're helping somebody on, it's 10% the thing they buy, and it's 90% what they think about it and how they feel about it. And so what we're doing is not relying only on the 10% of what they buy like everybody else does. We are trying as best as possible before, during, and after the purchase to get that 90% in there as well, to help empower them to think and feel differently about it. So when they use it, they get a better result.
Yeah. Jason, thank you. I think the few thoughts which are coming to me right now, I'm just going to share those quotes with you. As Carl Jung said, unless you bring unconscious to your conscious, it's continuously going to drive your life, and you would call it fate. That's one. Another thing that I heard you saying is, you have to kill a part of your own self to give birth to a new self, connecting it back to the identity. Revisit your identity which is not serving you. Identify the point, and if you can bring a crack there, it's going to de-cement, if I may use this word, it's going to de-cement the complete identity. But before that, take a pause and check, how has this identity served you? Using the time shift, fast forward 20 years, if you continue to operate from this space, what kind of future are you going to create and generate for yourself? When the pain is more than what's the payoff is, of course, you will start to think about the shifts that you need to bring in. And then instead, what could be an identity that you can step into that can create a future that you want to create in your life? Jason, I think this was pure gold for all the coaches, and the way you created a distinction between that we are in business, and when we are business, we are not here to do any kind of therapy. Just by holding the coaching position and the laws and the principles of persuasion, the laws and the principles that you have learned from selling through webinars, I think the same principles can be applied in life as well. Just last question, Jason, with all these insights and experiences that you've had for yourself, what's that one thing that you know for sure with 100% certainty?
The one thing I know for sure with 100% certainty is that it's uncertain. The only certainty in this world, the material world, is uncertainty. You got to be okay with knowing ultimately there are certain things that are in your control. This is the hardest lesson I had to learn. Well, I don't know if it's the hardest. It's one of the hardest. Is there are certain things that are out of your control. There's nothing you can do, no matter how good of a person you are, or no matter how hard you try. There's certain things that are just out of your control. This world, if it's fair and it's just, I can't see it. Good things will happen to bad people, and bad things will happen to good people. Tragedy will occur, and we will lose souls, beautiful young souls, and we can't explain it. We don't understand why, and that's hard. And this righteousness in which this violent righteousness in which I used to approach the world to try to fix these things, only led to despair every single time of fighting the reality that's in front of me. And so I've learned over the years, I have to be okay with not knowing what'll happen, no matter how much I prepare and no matter how much I try. And if I try too much, I'm trying to be God, right? Like my ego then says I am the controller, right? And no wonder it's such a distressful position to be in, because that's God's position. That's not my position, or it's not your position. And so I have to be simultaneously learning how to behave in a way where I work towards my goals as if there's an absolute certainty that I will reach them. So part of me, this is the greatest magic trick of all, if you can pull it off, of being able to operate with certainty as you have conflicting thoughts inside of yourself, and be okay with the conflict and the ability to not have resolution over them. So I have to operate in such a way where I go through it as if it's a certainty that I can achieve it, because that'll allow me the confidence to act boldly and work through all the challenges. But I also simultaneously have to be okay with something happens that prevents me from achieving that. Because this life, my friend, it is so brittle. It is so fickle. It can happen in an instance where something can just go wrong and you're done. Yeah. And maybe not even dead, right? Like my father had a stroke a couple years ago. And right before he had the stroke, he was working every day of his life, even in retirement. The guy, that's all he did was work. And then in one fateful evening, he went from working hard to not even be able to walk again, not even be able to talk. Parts of his brain are destroyed. He's not the same person he was. And it's sad, but it's like, that is the world we live in. Things like that can happen so quickly. So we simultaneously can't get attached to the outcomes as we work towards those outcomes. And that's the hardest thing of all that I've learned to do in this business, is to be okay with realizing that I'm going to give it the best I can, but the results are ultimately out of my hands. So if I meet with something that is unexpected, that's Krishna's design. That's something I have to accept. And my willingness to fight that is my willingness not to be in sync with the creator of this world that I live in. And that's tough. And that's hard. And so, you got to be certain about the uncertainty. You got to be okay with the fact that you could do everything right and it still not end up the way that you want it to be. But you still have to act as if it can be. That's the lesson.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much. And when you started this, when I asked you this question, what are you 100% sure about? You said in the materialistic world. And what you spoke about are the same laws that we apply in the four-dimensional world, where we talk about impermanence, when we talk about not taking anything personally. I think, thank you so much, Jason. It was such a beautiful conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed. This was pure gold. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and listening to this conversation. I'm sure you had amazing insights and reflections from this conversation and all the insights that Jason shared with us. Would love to hear from you. What are your key insights? Do share that with us at gauravinspires@gmail.com. At the same time, after a long time, I've come across a situation where somebody has been able to bring the materialistic world, somebody has been able to bring the laws and the principles of selling on webinars, and the law of impermanence, and the law of uncertainty, and the law of spirituality, and the laws of curiosity on the table. And every time when I'm bringing curiosity on table, you are letting go of identity. You are letting go of that streak to control things. You are letting go of that need to possess things that might lead to self-victimization. So remember that, and I look forward to hear from you. What are your key takeaways from this amazing conversation with Jason, the webinar man? The strategic problem solver. Thank you. Stay blessed. Stay tuned. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you so much.